So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Andrea De Candido, and I am currently chairing this IFAFRI, the International Forum to Advance First Responders Innovation, chairing on behalf of the Commission. It is really a pleasure to have you all in this event today, which is a first time in Europe. It is the second edition of an industry day following a first edition that took place in the US last year. And before going into the different discussions, please let me very briefly recall why we're here, meaning what is IFAFRI. IFAFRI is this international setting in which we look at what is required for first responders to do their job. And as such, IFAFRI does three things mainly. One is to look into the requirements that first responders have, look into what are their capability gaps. Once the capability gaps have been identified, and there are 10 of them that the group has identified as top priorities currently, the IFAFRI looks into, on one side, what is already available on the market in order to address these gaps that have been identified. So it allows for the end user communities to get in touch with the providers, so with the private sector mainly. And on the other side, the purpose of IFAFRI is to see, okay, if nothing is available on the market in terms of tools that can be immediately used, what needs to be done? Is there any research that needs to be launched in order to develop the technologies that then can be included in tools that will be finally made available to the first responders? And so this is the other work strand, focusing more on research that IFAFRI is looking into. Today's event is the Industry Day. So the main purpose is that to demonstrate what is already available. And this is why we've got an exhibition out there that you have already seen in terms of tools that are already there or very close to marketability, and that might be actually solving the gaps that IFAFRI has identified. And each of those tools that are displayed out there are responding to one or more of the capability gaps that have been identified by the group. The agenda of today. So we will have, first of all, three keynote speeches provided by Matthias Röhr, the director in DG Home of the Directorate dealing with borders, interoperability and innovation. This will be followed by an intervention by Julia Stewart-David, who is the head of unit in DG ECHO dealing with horizontal issues related to civil protection. And finally, we have the pleasure to have with us Radu Pop, who is head of infrastructures and frontier in Airbus, so representing the private dimension, the industrial dimension. After these keynote speeches, we will be diving a bit more into the substance of IFAFRI, and we will have Stefan Tangen, who is leading the capability gap assessment part of IFAFRI's work, who will be providing an overview of what has been done by IFAFRI in this domain. And this will be followed then by a general overview of the statement of objectives that have been produced by IFAFRI. And then we will come to the clue of the event, which will be having really the possibility to look at the different instruments, tools, and pieces of hardware that are out there on display. This will be done jointly with a standing lunch, so the issue is to make use of that time to go around, see what is on display, but at the same time to do a bit of networking, so to get to know each other better. And ending that, we will have in the afternoon a more leisure-oriented activity, which is the visit to the European Parliament. I hope this will be an opportunity for those especially that are coming outside of Europe and outside of Brussels, of course. I would like to I would like to just say for IFAFRI, it's been a year of changes. Apart from Stefan, who currently represents the historical memory of IFAFRI, I think, being one of the founding fathers and being guaranteeing the continuity in the work of the group, we have had a number of changes in terms of chairs of the different committees of IFAFRI. So we have with us here Ron McNeil, who's currently leading the Stakeholder Engagement Committee, and Jim Beckman, who's leading the Research and Development Fund. I would like to even, and with that I would end it, say a few words in relation to the fact that this IFAFRI is not a closed group, so I'm pleased that we have amongst us here today some representatives also from countries that are not already members of IFAFRI and that are here today to get an understanding of what IFAFRI is about, and then to possibly consider applying for membership of the group. With that, I would thank you again for your being here today, and I would hand over to Matthias, who will be providing the first keynote speech.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this year's Industry Day organized under the umbrella of IFAFRI. As Andrea said, it's the first time that this happens in Europe, and I'm happy for several reasons to open this conference, but I would like to mention two. First, because the challenges for first responders are indeed very similar in a global context, so that it makes full sense to exchange best practice in a multinational context. The second reason is that I'm very happy to see so many of you, as your presence confirms for me the huge potential which IFAFRI has in facilitating innovation for first responders. Better luck. Okay. Now, I hope that you followed up to here. These were more or less the welcome remarks. Now I'm coming more to the deep, and now I have a microphone. I would like to express special thanks to those colleagues who traveled a long distance. That shows also your commitment, your support by this event. And I would also like to extend a warm thank you to our exhibitors, whose really stunning solutions you can see later on, and I invite you really to do this. Let me also thank, and Andrea is sitting here to present this team, the entire team of DG Home, who invested a lot of work in organizing this event, so thank you very much to those colleagues too. This also shows you that the European Commission is proud to be the current chair of IFAFRI, and that we are working hard to make the idea behind it a success. And that is also why we have recently expanded the role of the Commission IFAFRI with a colleague from DG ECHO, which are in charge of humanitarian assistance, and they are now also supporting the work in the IFAFRI committees, and Julia Stewart-David sitting next to me giving evidence that ECHO is also participating. Let me briefly explain why the Commission is so strongly committed to IFAFRI. Protecting the security of its citizens is one of the most high-ranking priorities of the European Commission, and it is what the people in Europe expect from us. You all know that in the last years we were confronted with a lot of security threats in Europe, and that's why this is one of the highest political priorities. And in security, our main objective is making Europe a safe and secure place to be. And this is, of course, an objective for all of us, be it within or outside Europe. Criminality and terrorism do not know borders. Among other, our work should help the ones who do the most difficult part in protecting security, and these are the first responders. You as first responders put their own life in danger to protect us. And I therefore also want to use this event here today to thank all first responders in this room for their engagement. You are doing a dangerous and challenging job, and you deserve our respect for this. And this is also why we as policymakers feel and have an obligation to do whatever is possible to ensure you have the best equipment to face the challenge and to lower also the risk to lose your life. Ladies and gentlemen, before I come to the specific role of IFAFRI, allow me to give you a slightly broader picture on how we tackle the task of making innovation for first responders possible. As many of you know, under the roof of Horizon 2020, the framework program for research and innovation of the European Union, we are funding every year a significant number of projects in the area of security research. They are also aiming at better technologies and equipment for first responders, and some of the research results you can see later in the exhibition. However, research does not always automatically lead to new tools and instruments made available. This is because the civil security market is not a market like any other. Civil security market is institutional but fragmented. The civil security market consists of mainly public buyers and is driven by short-term demands. And there's a big difference to the defense market. And this often causes a discontinuity between research efforts and the actual market uptake. This is one of our biggest challenges we have in the area of security research. And what do we do to overcome this challenge? Research for security cannot stand alone, but it needs to be integrated in a wider capability development process, driven by policymakers and end users, such as first responders. It is the responder on the ground who can define best what kind of solution he or she needs. Meaning that if research is brought as close as possible to the first responder, it will consequently lead to results that have the highest impact on the front line, making the job of the first responders less dangerous and more efficient. And we as European Commission are following this path in research by involving end users, such as the first responders, as fully fledged beneficiaries into EU-funded projects. We are convinced that this involvement in an early stage of the innovation process is crucial. And thus, we made the involvement of end users in the research project consortia a mandatory criterion in Horizon 2020. So end users are mandatorily involved in projects we are funding under Horizon 2020, and we will continue along this path under the upcoming new framework program for research and innovation, which will be called Horizon Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, such a path cannot be followed without the continuous involvement of industry. And the representative of Airbus is sitting on the panel today. Without the knowledge and commitment of specialized companies, possible innovative solutions would be trapped in endless circles of research and could never be brought to the market, and thus not to the first responders. So we need the end user and we need industry as well. And this means that an effective capability development process needs industry as one of the key actors. And this is in particular IFAFRI, who recognizes this crucial role of the security industry as well, and wants to make use of its innovative potential to support first responders with first-class products. In this context, allow me to highlight one more fundamental feature of IFAFRI, and this is its international scope. The forum provides a unique setting for sharing information at the global level among partners in security. And IFAFRI is not at all a closed shop. Andrea de Candido mentioned this in the beginning. New members are very welcome. And I see it in this context as a promising sign that a lot of participants today are coming from non-IFAFRI countries and may use this opportunity to make themselves familiar with its interesting work. Let me, ladies and gentlemen, finally emphasize the uniqueness of the process set up within IFAFRI to identify and analyze capability gaps. There is no doubt that any requirement is valid and relevant if discussed between so many first responders from different parts of the world. And this was done just a few weeks ago here in Brussels during the Statement of Objectives validation meeting. Without going into details of this process, because this will be presented to you at a later stage in this conference, I can, however, confirm that the level of granularity of the SOO document, the Statement of Objectives document, is impressive and should serve as very good guidelines for the colleagues from industry and research to suggest solutions for the capability gaps. Due to the work done ahead of this meeting will already be a success, and I can say that as first speaker already now. I would like to invite you all to take the time to speak with the different exhibitors, as I said already, that have gathered here today with a number of examples of solutions and initiatives that address selected capability gaps identified by IFAFRI. Outside, you have the success stories. I'm convinced that today's event marks a step into the right direction towards innovation for the ones who protect us, the first responders. And therefore, I thank you all once again for joining us, and I wish you very interesting discussions, exciting insights in modern technology for first responders, and of course also a lot of fun. The visit to the European Parliament will certainly be very interesting this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I will now ask Julia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Microphones between me and you. Let's try it like this. How does that work? Okay, great. So I'm Julia Stewart, Head of Civil Protection. You heard that earlier. And there are a few familiar faces in the audience, which is always good. But even better, there are a lot of people in here that I have never met before. So my objective in the 10 minutes that I have is to let you know from our perspective in European civil protection where we think we have gaps, where we're going, what the trends are. And my underlying objective is that for those who have never known or come across directly the Union's civil protection mechanism, you leave here today with enough curiosity to know why it matters to you. Okay? So, first of all, the niceties, ladies and gentlemen and ladies, I should say. Thank you very much, Matthias, Andrea, for inviting me, DG Home, and for IFAFRI for giving us this opportunity to talk about civil protection and our needs. The forum represents first responders, and I would be interested to know in your minds who you think first responders are in Europe. I represent, through my intervention today, one section, the civil protection section, known in many member states as the Search and Rescue Service and the Fire Service. It depends, it's very varied. However, we also work day in, day out with the other first responders, including the emergency health community and, of course, law enforcement. And I'll come on to that briefly later. Civil protection is moving. Civil protection is evolving. The risks are evolving, and therefore the response and the preparedness need to evolve. So, briefly, the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, it brings together all of the currently 28 EU member states and a further 6 so-called participating states in our neighbourhood, including Turkey, North Macedonia, Serbia, Norway, for example. And we intervene, or we help intervene, when the scale of a disaster outstrips the national capacity to respond. And that is on the basis of a so-called request for assistance. We don't go in unwanted, a very important principle. We make sure that the needs that are being identified we can meet through what we have. So there's a whole process behind this, and the process I think is important for you to understand too. So any country in the world can request assistance. And what the European Commission does at the heart of that, if you've never been to the ERCC, the Emergency Response Coordination Centre, 24/7, just down the road, we are there with early warning, we're there with a communication system, we're there with expertise, we're there with the ability to deploy a team from across Europe within hours, if necessary, depending on the kind of disaster. So we coordinate, but we also play our classic Commission role in that we fund, we support knowledge exchange, and we bring together, we enable bringing together the community of civil protection. So to give you a flavour, this year, and you know it well, we have intervened in, under the Union Civil Protection Mechanism in the Bahamas, in Greece and in Bolivia on forest fires, very traditional disasters. We're still keeping a very close eye on the Ebola situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and neighbours potentially, and its potential knock-on effect. And many other areas, but one of our key interventions is in providing mapping services to those who need a little support but not the full teams. And just to give you the evolution, since 2001, when we started bringing together civil protection at the European level, the Union Civil Protection Mechanisms responded in over 300 disasters throughout Europe and in different parts of the world. So what do we need and what do? We send trained multinational teams. Interoperability is key. We send specialised equipment. We send people who know how to use the specialised equipment. So I'll come back to that when it's to what you as industry might be thinking about. And I mentioned it, we're in evolution. Civil protection has, like everything in the European Union, a legal base. Last year we spent a lot of time talking to all the member states about nationally what we could do to improve our preparedness. Why? Principally driven by actually a very traditional situation, the forest fire situation. But the forest fire situation, traditional, in the south of Europe. Now we're seeing longer seasons, we're seeing forest fires in the Arctic, and as many of you must know, we had a massive intervention last year in Sweden. So forest fires, most traditional area, is no longer a predictable, easy to prepare for and well-equipped area in Europe. And that's what we know. And then we're also moving into the unknowns and the other kinds of disasters we might need to prepare for. I'll come on to that. So we have a pool of assets available that are pre-exercised, that meet a certain requirement and set of standards together, where the teams know how to deploy wherever they're needed. Cross-sectoral approaches I've mentioned. We're very hot on something known as self-sufficiency, meaning that when you go into a disaster zone, you need to be able to look after yourself and your equipment and make it work. It's pretty basic, but you would be surprised how difficult that can be. We introduced last year something known as RescEU. RescEU is a reserve capacity to be built up at a European level to support our member states. So I hope you are hearing development opportunity here. To support member states where either they are unable to provide sufficient capacity for their own national needs, or where it's an overwhelming disaster or series of disasters, which is even more likely, where national capacity clearly will not be able to cope. Rescue, I'll come on to what we're looking at in a moment, but that builds on this underlying process of modules, as we call them, so specific capacities within the capability that are ready to deploy. And then it adds a layer on top, which will be owned by member states, but which can be deployed as a safety net. So today, I'm conscious of time. I think we're already starting a little late. I'm not going to go into all of the gaps, and we've already gone through a very interesting process on that. But I would like to mention a few areas we're specifically looking at together with the member states. And I see that I'll also turn in a moment to a study that we've just done, because one of the difficulties from a public sector perspective is actually knowing what the capability, what the capacities are throughout the member states in all its senses. They may be owned by the military, they may be owned by the Ministry of Agriculture, they may be owned by the private sector. To get the full picture, it can be quite a challenge. So we've just done a major study on that, a capacity gap study. My colleagues, Francesca Otta here, Alessandro Carotta, can you just put your faces to the names? They will be here all day, so you're most welcome to talk to them more about that and civil protection. And I see that the colleagues in Resilience Advisors who've been doing the study are also sitting there, so they will be able to go into the detail. Some gaps that we face. In the medical area, we're looking at the development of a so-called emergency medical team 3. It's jargon, you're not disaster specialists, most of you, but it basically means the total complete field hospital that can be deployed in any major scenario where basic public health is no longer available. There are two of these worldwide at the moment, one in China, one in Israel, and we're looking at cooperating across Europe to create one at the European level. It poses technological challenges and governance challenges, and for us the two often come together, as do the challenges of making sure it is operable. So let me remind you what we're after here. We're after interoperability, I'm sorry, I keep saying it, but wherever these assets need to be deployed, under whatever circumstances they need to be deployed, anywhere, transportable, very important, and easy to maintain and to use. Civil protection personnel can be very specialised, but we can be talking about local frontline firefighters. So we're also short, and you'll be glad to know that, of communications. One of the things we have on our side is a lot of data, a lot of evidence on what goes on in disasters. We learn lessons every time we operate, or at least we identify the lessons every time we operate. And communication comes back consistently, time after time after time, as one of the biggest challenges. So communication platforms that can quickly re-establish communications in remote areas under any circumstances. And I know that today you will see some examples of that, so I hope that's encouraging. We're also looking very seriously at the issue of CBRN. Now I'm looking to make sure that everybody knows what that means: chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear incidents. It's a big gamut of potential disaster. Traditionally, we've looked at it in terms of industrial accident, nuclear safety, and so on and so forth. I talked about the need to be cross-sectoral. More and more, we have evidence of the potential use of intentional threat, terrorism, some of you might know it as, particularly in the domain of biological attacks. That could be a whole game changer if that happened in some major public transport system in a major European city. We're not prepared. No, I don't want anyone to go out of here feeling alarmed. There is a limit. There is a limit to how prepared we can be, and judging the risk and judging the acceptable risk is part of the decision-making process. But what we would like to be able to do is make sure our traditional first responder teams can operate in CBRN conditions. Okay? Behind that, we need to put in place ability to detect and to identify what we're talking about extremely quickly. You all know last year's incident in Salisbury in the UK, a 4-person incident. The resources and the system behind dealing with that were enormous, and I invite you to speak to the colleagues later about that. The first and the most tricky part of that is knowing what substance you're dealing with. Okay, and then the consequent effects for the health responders, for the first responders, for the firemen, etc. So yes, we need technological innovation, we need methodological innovation, we need trained personnel who know how to use the products and assets that you're proposing. We have a lot of information on the operational components of dealing with disaster. So I think I said I would share what we're not so good at. What we're not so good at is foresight, We're not so good at thinking long term. We're not so good at spotting things emerging from the market that could actually be game changers in civil protection if enough of the authorities took it up, trained their personnel, etc. So that's where you come in, because that, I think, is something that could be done in a dance partnership, backwards, forwards. You know, where are we going? Where are you going? What's coming onto the market? Bolivia, forest fire, Amazon. There we had the use and the request for the drones. We've been working on the drones or the UAVs for some time. But what we learn operationally is that doing that in the middle of the Amazonia in a country like Bolivia is not the same, surprise, surprise, as doing it down in Spain. So there are a lot of lessons for us that we can help transfer to you. So DG Home, of course, I would expect you to, and I'm very glad you mentioned Horizon. So on the horizon is the new Horizon. We do try and plug into that in terms of priority setting, but it is tricky. You know, one area that distinguishes, I would say, disaster responders is its public sector, and it's probably relatively under-resourced. So there are limits to what can go on there. But what we've tried to do under Rescue is also build a network, a specific network, where we go beyond the family of civil protection and talking to each other about operations, but we specifically plug into what's going on scientifically, academically, in institutes, in the whole first responder community. So yes, our links could be stronger with you in industry, both on our current needs and our future, and maybe even our as yet to be identified needs. We don't have a civil protection market per se. We do introduce in this new rescue legislation the idea of jointly procuring with our member states. Now, some of you will know from the other side that dealing with joint procurement is a very tricky business. We're certainly working very closely on something known as medical countermeasures at the moment. We're looking into the future of a very traditional area, aerial forest firefighting, and who knows after that. That is a subject of much discussion. I saw you have a very nice project and example on personal protective equipment. That comes back to us time and again from the civil protection community, as well as from the security side. And I do make a plea at this stage to please remember, when you're in the design phase and the testing phase, that first responders are both men and women, and personal protective equipment should also protect the women first responders to the same degree as the men. I think I could just leave that one hanging, and if you don't know the fine examples that we have out there of people dying as a result of poor design and poor testing, some of the colleagues can tell us. So my invitation is to you. I hope you have spiked your interest in the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, in civil protection nationally, in the study, which I have just mentioned the surface of, because you will have time to talk to colleagues over coffee. But I would like to extend also an invitation to our big gathering, and our big gathering happens every few years. At the moment I'm waiting for a new commissioner like the rest of the commission, but I am hot in the planning for a civil protection forum, more or less this time next year. And that is where we exhibit, we gather all of the 34 member states, the wider community, many of our international partners, to look at challenges around disaster management, and of course it will be wonderful to have some industry representative there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. Now, last but not at all least, I'm going to hand over the floor to Radu. I'm again really pleased to have you now on stage and ready to give your speech, because the participation of industry, as already highlighted, is really fundamental in this process. And again, not only in terms of providing the tools, but also in terms of looking with us what the future will be in order to start working today on what will be required tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Let me try to put this here. Does this work? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrea, and the organizers for.
Want to have this one?
No, I don't want that.
Okay.
So, thank you very much for giving us the chance to be here today and share you a little bit our view from the industry. Listening to you, Julia and Matthias, the expectation from the users towards us, the industry is quite high. And therefore, I'm happy that we have the chance to share this panel today, because I have to say, we on the industry side, Airbus, and also with our partners in the European Organization for Security, are willing to be a partner in this discussion. We are not just here to sell stuff. We are, at the end, sometimes a real beneficiary of what you guys are able to do and your capability of response. And the incidents in the world not late ago have shown that the industry is unfortunately often the end beneficiary of first responders. And therefore we want to be always absolutely sure that whatever tools you have are adapted, are reasonable, are resilient, because sometimes we end up by being the ones being saved by those tools. Well, if it doesn't work, I will just speak, and therefore you can. Yeah. So why Airbus? I mean, every one of you knows us from our planes, which most of us use when traveling to and from Airbus. But we are not only a provider of platforms. We are. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So we are not only a provider of flying platforms, although this is indeed our main business, but we are also a provider of secure communications, and many of you in the first responder world are using our Tetra or Tetrapol systems since quite a lot of years. We also do satellite communications. We are actually one of the largest providers of satcoms in the world. We also do space-based monitoring, and it's very interesting to listen to what you are saying about prevention and about preparation and readiness, and I'm going to come back to this later on in my slides. Search and rescue, protection of infrastructures, command and control. All those are topics that we are looking at, and not only us, other members of the industry are also looking at that, and those are very important matters. Can you go to the next slide? So, from our experience, which is also quite global, I have to say, our take of what are your expectations is, and this is not a restricted list, is that you are, as users, expecting unified concept of operations. This is something we get from a lot of customers around the world. You are expecting interoperability of systems, and this is a key element of first response. And you may see later on during lunch, we have brought in one demonstrator which shows exactly interoperability between hybrid networks. You are expecting fast decision making. This is very important. This is key when crises arise. Rapidity of response is key to be able to contend and to really act accordingly. You are expecting to be able to respond fastly. This is a very key element. You want to have resilience, as you said. Whatever you have in use as systems, equipments, and capabilities must be resilient, must be easy to maintain, easy to use. And how do we achieve the level of expectation, both from you responders and from the public? Because at the end, we have several customers, not only the buyers, but the public is the last customer of whatever we provide here. We need to be ready. Readiness is for us a key element, and it was already mentioned in the speeches before me. And how do we get to be ready? So we have identified, and we are splitting that internally into 4 different topics. First one is prevention and preparation works. There's a lot of work to be done in order to be prepared. And of course, we cannot be prepared for everything. Okay? Threats evolve, situations evolve, but we have to do a lot of preparatory work in order to be ready. Then we need to improve our capacity of early detection. As soon as we detect something can happen, as soon as we can act. And this is very important. Then we need to respond. So fast response capabilities are key. and rapidly deploy the capabilities. And late, of course, recovery, which is an element which is also sometimes forgotten, but it is also quite important. We in Airbus, just to give you a very brief overview, and I'm not here today to give you a speech on products. This you can see later on when we will demonstrate something. It's more about the vision and about the industry view of how we can provide integrated systems and solutions and capabilities. We have a wide area of products. Of course, platforms, and I was very interested to hear about the use of drones in Bolivia. I'm going to pass this message to my colleagues into the unmanned air systems. Helicopters, of course, transport or intelligence getting planes. This is our core business, of course. But also, again, space-based monitoring, which is increasingly important into how we build our capabilities, into how we do prevention, how we already focus on specific areas, how we do, that I will show you a little bit later on, change monitoring, for example, which is quite important when we are really looking at response. Intelligence centers, multi-source data fusion. You are absolutely right. Data is today the fuel of 50 years ago. Today we have massive amounts of data, and the way we process those and the rapidity of processing those and the intelligence, the actionable intelligence we can get out of those are today key elements in how we answer events. Obviously, resilient communication systems. Clearly, this is for me the backbone of first response. But also prevention and learning modules, simulation capabilities, how we train our people, and those are things that we industry are looking at quite seriously. And of course, everything must be fast deployed. If it's not fast and it is not deployable, it will only be something that we spend money on and we cannot use it properly in operation. So we split that internally into three different clusters. So first cluster is prepare and prevent. And here we have identified a number of solutions, and it can go from satellites. Obviously, we own our playard of satellites, both satellite communications, surveillance, intelligence, radar satellites, meteorological satellites, etc. But also high altitude drones like pseudo satellites. And I'm not sure if you are aware, but we are working on something which is called the Zephyr, which is a pseudo satellite, which can be much faster deployable. It is more easily to operate. And it is something in the middle between a UAV and a satellite, flying above 70,000 meters. Drones, this is more classical. Imagery, intelligence center, command and control, of course. But also somewhere in the middle, and I will go back later on, infrastructures. IT infrastructures, security operation centers, etc. Those are key elements, key foundations that have to be looked at. Very briefly, command and control center, intelligence centers. We are here looking at both image intelligence, open source intelligence, and a large number of data. And we have developed different tools. We have something we call massive intelligence, where you can fuse a number of data coming from multiple sources and multiple kind of intelligence gathering tools, including the citizens, because we are living in a world today where we have billions of sensors, I mean phones, people, social media. We have a huge amount of sources that have to be filtered and gathered and built into actionable intelligence. So we are looking on all these things. We also own and we have built up, it's called One Atlas, a huge database of data based on image, of satellite imagery and of the whole change monitoring of the planet. And those things are very useful for, many of you are already using those capabilities from us. Sometimes, unfortunately, clusterized, I have to say, it is a fact. The integration of all of those, it's still sometimes not the easiest part. But we industry are looking at that and we'll be very happy to discuss this topic. Then we have what we call the foundation clusters. So obviously the communication systems, the IT systems, the physical security is also important. If we look at industrial events, proper planning on the critical infrastructure side of systems, of security elements, etc. is key. And we are looking at those in an integrated manner, not just put some fences, put some CCTV. This is old school. We have to test that. Just as an example, of course, we have, for example, we can provide complete end-to-end communication systems. between land-based systems, Tetrapod, for example, which are very used. LTE, we can integrate different hybrid networks. We can provide those based on satellite communications, satellite network, all fast, scalable, and interoperable. These three being the key elements of any serious communication system. But also, and I know this is not the topic of today, but we have to think about it, cybersecurity. We live in a world where everything is more and more interconnected. It is not a topic of discussion today, but we have to keep this in mind, because any weakness in our systems is a weakness that, unfortunately, sometimes actors, may they be state or third party, whatever, are exploiting. And systems which are today not properly secured become weaknesses in a later stage. And this has to be properly considered. Then, and this is more into the element of today, response clusters. And obviously here our portfolio is looking pretty much into platforms, so airplanes, helicopters, unmanned systems, pseudo-satellites, etc. But not only, and you can see on the next slide, that we are looking also on, for example, crisis management support solutions, deployable command and control systems, deployable intelligence gathering systems, so vehicles, command and control, expandable command and control systems, mobile hospitals, all which are designed to be transportable, mainly on air. Being a builder of airframes makes our life easier when we design our solutions, because they are all designed to be transportable on aircraft. And I had a slide on an A400, but I took it out because this may be a bit controversial. But nevertheless, our capabilities are transportable. And I think this is a key element, especially if we look at operating out of Europe, which we do more and more. It is important that we are able to transport our equipment, move it fast, deploy it fast, and do this in a secure manner. And now I'm getting close to finishing my speech, and I just want to give you a very brief overview of what we have learned in 30 years or more of operating in the systems. First of all, standardization is a very key element. I know we don't really like this word, but it helps a lot sometimes when we have to deploy systems. Quality of information and how we exchange it. Those are key elements. If the information gathering is not properly done, if the data fusion and the way we create actionable intelligence out of that is not properly done, then the response is poor. And how we exchange it. I am a former operator myself, so I have spent 9 years working for the Romanian government in a different area, but I do know sometimes intelligence exchange between agencies is not the easiest thing, but we have to work on that. It is the only way to be able to build serious joint capability. We need flexibility, but we need resilience. Flexibility of systems should not be a reason to lay down on resilience. Both have to be achieved. Then, rapidity. We must be fast. Our customers expect that whatever we deploy, whatever we deliver is fast. And they are able to learn how to use it fast, to learn how to deploy it fast, and to do whatever it takes, it must be fast. Last but not least, we must learn how to anticipate to the best. You are absolutely right. I mean, we are not into the magic, but we have to be able to learn how to anticipate. We need to learn how to prepare ourselves better. We say very often that Christmas surprises are good for Christmas, but never good in a crisis management situation. So I want to thank you very much for giving me the chance to be here today. I really would like to invite you during lunch to see Agnet, something which is really into the spirit of the discussion today, where we can show how we can demonstrate interoperability between hybrid networks, Tetra and LTE. I'm not sure what 5G will bring, but we are already looking at that, and this is clearly, although controversial, an area which will open completely new capabilities. And I'm very happy from the message, and we industry are definitely here to be your partner in this business. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Radu. It was very informative for us in order to orient even ourselves in the future work. This brings us to the end of this first part of the event, this very first part of the event, the three keynote speeches. I think what I take out of it is that when we're speaking about the work to be done by first responders, and when we speak about what is needed to ensure that first responders have what they need to do their work on a daily basis, it's a problem that is not only for one specific community, it's not only for the first responders themselves. We need a number of actors that come together around the table and work together in collaboration in order to then be able to make sure that we develop the right tool for the job to be performed. And the other thing that I take out of this is that to develop these tools, it takes a bit of time. And so we need to work better on things like Julia was mentioning, foresight and this kind of dimension in order to make sure that when we start working on something, it is actually reflecting not only today's need, but the situation in which we will be when the tools will be eventually ready for deployment. So, thanks again to all three of you. I would ask for a final round of applause to our speakers. Of course, before now going back to your work in your offices, we would like you to go through the different to the exhibition that is out there so that you get a first-hand feeling of what we're speaking about. Thank you again.